Okay, as you can see from that intro, which we've borrowed from our sister program, Bullock's Rules for Cooking, bias means a slant. And you even saw a little bit there at the end where when you cut a carrot on the bias, it looks deceptively large compared to cutting a carrot not on the bias. So you can already begin to think about what this means in terms of diction. That diction, of course, being the particular word choice of an author, that if that diction is biased, there's going to be a slant to it. There's going to be something false about it, as opposed to if a writer had just taken a purely neutral or unbiased stance. But let's get some actual definitions here for you. Biased diction is words that show an explicit or implicit opinion or judgment from a writer. Then neutral diction, words that show no explicit or implicit judgment or opinion from a writer. You might remember from the last couple of episodes that we're saying these ways to describe diction exist along a continuum. The same thing is true. Like if you are biased, you can have really, really negative things to say. You can have really, really positive things to say. But we, then in the middle, you would also put neutral. Now, if my definitions there got you thinking a little bit about connotation and denotation, then you are already ahead of me, because really, when we talk about bias, we are talking about the connotation of words. Now, if you don't know the difference between connotation and denotation, I'll do a real quick review. You can keep these two straight because of the first letter of the words. Denotation is the definition of a word, the just plain black and white meaning. Sometimes you say the denotation is the dictionary definition, so you're doubling up on the D's there, tripling up on the whatever. But connotation is the color of a word. So it's the emotional weight or the societal expectations or other things that are really behind or associated with a particular word. And so to give you an example, you could say, you could be talking about a dog, right? But you could say something that's really positive. Use a really positive word like a pupper. You could use a really neutral word like canine, or you could use a really negative word like a mangy cur. All of those refer to dogs, but each one of those puts a different image in our head and carries different emotional weight. And for evidence in this episode, I am going to move away from former President Obama. After all, he does not need me to hype him up. He already comes with a bit of a rep and a following. Instead, I'm going to dig into the seamy underbelly of YouTube, which is the debate over whether the Earth is flat or round. We're going to start. I'm going to show you this first clip by one of my personal heroes, YouTube heroes anyway, Michael Stevens from VSauce. This is from an episode that he did of VSauce called "Is the Earth Actually Flat?" Take a look.
Hey, VSauce, Michael here. In 2003, researchers did the measurements and found that Kansas is, in fact, literally flatter than a pancake. Of course, the Earth is not flat, the Earth is round. Otherwise, travelers would be falling off the edge all the time. Right? Wrong. If the Earth was not a ball shape, but was instead a flat disk, like this plate, well, with the right density and thickness, living in the middle could feel pretty normal. But as you moved toward the edge, gravity on a disk Earth would slightly skew, pushing at a greater and greater angle back toward the center.
Now, I did not say this before I played the clip, but when you're in doubt, look at the title. I mean, always look at the title. The title is going to let you know what the creator, what the author is really thinking about what's going on. So think about the diction in the title. Is the Earth actually flat? Now, syntactically, we can say it's a question, but he's actually got that word actually, which when you're using it, especially in a question, provides some measure of wiggle. He's not making a judgment, or VSauce is not making a judgment in the title about whether or not the Earth is actually flat. But what did you think of the diction in the actual clip? I mean, just real quick right now in your mind, positive, negative, or neutral? Well, we'll see if you agree with my assessment. And I want to talk about, I think, the two most weighted words or phrases that he uses in that clip, and that is the word wrong and the phrase of course. So he uses the word wrong when he talks about the globe earthers believing that if the Earth were really flat, people could fall off the edge. That's kind of a pro-globe thought. But then he says wrong. So that word, which is, again, one of the strongest and emotionally heavy words in that entire clip, saying wrong is actually sort of against the people who believe in the globe. But then he's also used the word of course phrase, of course. That does definitely show some judgment when he says, of course, the world is round. But, like when you're thinking in terms of words that you could say that show judgment, wrong and of course are not on the extreme ends of any kind of a spectrum. And what I really like about it is that he's got the one, wrong, which is sort of telling people who believe in the globe, hey, your belief or a part of your belief might not be true. And then when he says, of course, he's actually saying to the globers, people who believe in the globe, he's saying, well, your thing is true. So even in his use of those two words, which are weighted, but not weighted very much, he's using them on opposite sides of the flat and round Earth debate. I think at the end of the day, we're going to call his diction in that clip neutral. But wait a minute, Bullock, you're saying you picked 3 words out of an entire, what was that, 45-second clip? I don't think you can make a judgment just based on 3 words. And okay, you're right. So let me put up a bit of extended text that he did right there near the end of that clip.
Well, with the right density and thickness, living in the middle could feel pretty normal. But as you moved toward the edge, gravity on a disk Earth would slightly skew, pushing at a greater and greater angle back toward the center.
Okay, so that is a pretty significant piece of text, and we can look at the diction within there. What words in there are heavy? What words in there have a significantly different connotation than denotation? I really don't think there are any. If anything, that part of Michael's text sounds sterile and scientific, and like there's no judgment at all going on there. Now, I mean, okay, I get it. If you believe in the flat Earth, the word gravity itself is a trigger because flat earthers do not believe in gravity, and people don't fall off of the edge of the Earth, of course, because of the giant ice wall that surrounds the flat. The Earth is round. I'm going to take you to an actual flat Earth believer. This is a guy named Nathan Thompson. It was originally posted as a Facebook video. Nathan Thompson apparently runs or moderates a Flat Earth Facebook group. But I found it on a YouTube channel called Flat Earth Talk. And the title of this one is Things Globeheads Say. I'm going to let you sit with that title for a second and do a little bit of a contrast between that title and the title of the VSauce episode. But anyway, Here's the clip.
I had an interaction today at AT&T with like 10 gentlemen that were all working at AT&T, and there were 0 customers in there. So I decided to tell them all about Flat Earth, and they had the same questions that everyone's always asking every time they come in the group. So I just want to make a video about how redundant the Globeheads are with their arguments, because it's so programmed, it's so Pavlov, and I don't know if you guys know what a Pavlovian response is, but they did a test, and they used to ring the bell and then serve dinner to the dogs, and then they found out that they just have to ring the bell and the dogs would start salivating like the dinner was coming. And so that's exactly what happens with Flat Earth. You say Flat Earth, you ring the bell, and all the Globeheads just start foaming at the mouth and telling you how stupid you are.
So again, they're a little bit less than a minute of a clip. Let's talk about that title. Things Globehead say. And then Globehead, of course, is a word that he used in the video. And I don't think I said this previously, but the links to the full videos of all 3 clips I'm going to show you today are down in the description. I encourage you to watch this whole thing by Nathan Thompson, because he actually takes a globe that he has hollowed out and put some eye holes in, and he puts it on his head when he gets around to imitating the things that Globeheads say. But yeah, obviously Globeheads there is a little bit of a weighted term. It's obviously intended as an insult. And then another, right near the beginning, when he's talking about being in the AT&T store and he says there are 10 gentlemen, he didn't do air quotes, but I heard air quotes. I think he's using gentleman there kind of sarcastically. And so even turning a nice word like gentleman into an insult in the way he's using it. So already you can start to see that I feel like the diction in this particular video is pretty negative. And I've got a lot more evidence than just that. Take a look.
How redundant the Globeheads are with their arguments, because it's so programmed, it's so Pavlovian.
Redundant obviously is a kind of negative word. If you don't know it, then it might not seem negative to you, but it means saying the same thing over and over again, maybe in different ways, but it's a synonym for repetitive, basically. But you can think of positive ways to say that people who believe in a globe make the same arguments over and over again. You could call them persistent. That would be a much more positive seeming diction. Pavlovian, programmed, right? These are not things that you would say. If you don't know Pavlov, I will put a link down in the description below on classical conditioning. But, you know, programmed, obviously, like if you're programmed to behave that way, that's a negative. You can think of positive synonyms, that you are trained, you are brought up, other things that you could say besides programmed. But then even when he's talking about Pavlov, because he gives his sort of recounting of Pavlov's experiment, it's not entirely accurate, but it really is true that Pavlov began to notice that you could bring about a physical reaction in the dogs through a stimulus other than food, once they've associated food with that stimulus. And so when he's describing Pavlov's experiments, he uses the word salivating, because that's what they noticed. The dogs would start to salivate when they had this other stimulus. But when he's talking about people who believe in a round earth, he doesn't use salivating. He doesn't use even slobbering, which is negative but kind of goofy. He uses the phrase foaming at the mouth. You know, that when people who believe in the globe hear the phrase flat earth, they start foaming at the mouth. Where have you heard that? What do we associate with foaming at the mouth, particularly with dogs, right? Rabies. So he's gone from describing the saliva and the salivating, which, you know, is kind of that neutral scientific diction, to foaming at the mouth, which is very heavily negative. I would have to say, on balance, Nathan Thompson here, his diction is negative. Third and final clip for this episode. This is a YouTube user named SciManDan. I assume he is a scientist of some flavor, and his name is Dan. This is a clip from a video that he's entitled Top 5 Reasons Why Flat Earthers Are Wrong! Exclamation point, exclamation point. Again, you know, you can think about what Dan was trying to get across with that title. So I'm going to let the clip run. We'll talk about it on the other side.
Having surrounded myself with this flat earth nonsense for a good few months now, I believe I've found the best proofs to show just how wrong they are. Proofs that are the most difficult to explain away for a flat earther. As usual, I invite the flat earth community to have a go anyway. Usually, their attempts only serve to discredit them further. So, without further ado, let's get this going. 1. The retrograde motion of Mars. One of the fundamental beliefs of a flat earther is that we are also at the centre of everything. The world is of a geocentric ilk. They also don't believe that space is real. The retrograde motion of Mars completely destroys both these views with staggering simplicity. Every couple of years, something happens in our night sky that proves we are in orbit around the Sun. If you track Mars's position in the sky night after night against the stars, you'll note that it moves in an easterly direction. This can be done with just your eyes and a notepad. No telescope required. However, for a couple of months every 2 years, you will notice that Mars appears to start moving in a westerly direction each night. Then continue to move east again, tracking a small circle in the sky. Every 26 months or so, Earth comes up from behind and overtakes Mars. As we pass it, it will look as though Mars is moving backwards in the sky. Then as we move around our orbit, the illusion stops and Mars continues on its usual path. As you can see, this is only possible when in orbit around the Sun. An absolute smoking gun for the proof of space and a heliocentric solar system.
Okay, so just real quick, first impression, what did you think of his diction? We'll see where I fall on it, but I want to talk about probably at the beginning of the clip, the most weighted word he uses is nonsense. And I want you to notice the difference between nonsense and globehead. When Dan here is talking about the flat earth movement, he calls their beliefs nonsense. When Nathan Thompson was talking about those who believe in a round earth, a globe earth, he's not talking about their beliefs when he says globeheads. That's a personal insult that he's throwing. So just the difference there between those words, even though nonsense has some weight to it, you'll notice that Dan is applying it not to the people, but to the ideas and beliefs. And speaking of those ideas and beliefs, I want to go to something that Dan said at the end of this clip.
The retrograde motion of Mars completely destroys both these views with staggering simplicity.
Okay, obviously, destroys and staggering are pretty heavily weighted words. They come with some specific connotations. But what's being destroyed? What has staggering simplicity? And again, it's the belief in a flat earth, and his own example is the one with staggering simplicity. So what he's basically saying here at the end, in that part of the clip, he is not speaking negatively about people who believe in a flat earth, or even negatively about the flat earth movement itself, or the flat earth theory itself. He is instead really talking about his evidence, the retrograde motion of Mars. It's that is a destroyer and that has staggering simplicity. He's speaking positively. He's using these weighted words to speak positively about his own beliefs and not to speak negatively about others and other people. When you go back through that clip, the worst thing that Dan says about people who believe in the flat earth is that he calls them flat earthers, which, is a word that they call themselves. So I think at this point, it's pretty clear where I put these three on the spectrum. I would say that Nathan Thompson, the Globeheads guy, I would say that he's using pretty negative diction in that clip. I'd say that Michael from VSauce is using pretty neutral diction, and I would say that Dan in his clip is using pretty positive diction. Now, as I said, all three videos are linked below, so you can watch the whole thing. These were just small pieces of much longer videos, and it's possible, and you can let me know down in the comments if you think I am taking those clips out of context, or if I'm misrepresenting the overall diction of any of these videos. But for now, I think those make a pretty good set of examples for what positive diction might sound like, what neutral diction might sound like, and what negative diction might sound like. One thing that all three of those clips had in common is that the bias or the neutrality was explicit in the words that they were using. I said explicit and implicit, it's opposite, at the beginning of the episode. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know what those words mean, but here's a quick review. Explicit means clearly stated or obvious, made obvious. So like somebody wearing a Brewers t-shirt, a Brewers hat, is at the Brewers game, is going like, "Go Brewers!" that's a pretty explicit statement of that person's sports ball loyalties. On the other hand, if somebody has the game in an earbud and they're maybe wearing a blue shirt, but it doesn't have a Brewers logo or anything, but that person is still a Brewers fan, that's implicit. It's something that we can't entirely see. It's maybe not even something that that person is fully aware of. Maybe that person wasn't thinking, it's a Brewers game today, I'm going to wear blue, but their subconscious, way back in the back of their mind, said, get the blue shirt. So that's explicit versus implicit. Wait a minute, you might be asking. All right, I can understand how you would take explicit bias in a writer's diction and talk about it. But if there's implicit bias, like, how am I even going to know? How would I recognize it? How would I analyze it? I'll start by saying that for the most part, implicit bias is going to be one of the isms, right? Sexism, racism, ageism, baldism. So if you notice that, for example, a writer is using the word he when the writer means a person of any particular gender, or the writer is using words like mankind instead of humankind, that's an implicit bias of a sexist sort of bent. And you can talk about, well, I don't know if we can trust this writer because he obviously does not believe that women can do things too. In English usage, pretty much everybody is moving away from sexist diction like that. The Academy Awards gives out trophies for the best male actor and the best female actor. Your flight attendants are flight attendants, not stewardesses. You go to a restaurant and you have a server instead of a waitress. But you can also look for some implicit racism. Authors who use images like darkness to signify evil, or when their bad guys are always dark, or there's some savagery or something like that, you might start to, well, wait, hey, what does this person actually think about African Americans? What's going on here? And all of those other isms too. Basically anything where you see that a writer is creating without explicitly saying that he or she is doing it. When a writer is creating an us versus them kind of situation, that is an implicit bias, and it's something that you, as one analyzing a text, should be aware of. So that's implicit bias for you as a reader, you as somebody who does analysis. But what about implicit bias for you as a writer? Well, I'm going to tell you, the thing that I see most often in student writing that shows implicit bias is the assumption that student writers make that the whole world is like them and their world. So I end up with a lot of sentences in papers that are something like, most everybody skips school at least once. And that might be true in your world. I mean, you would never skip school, but maybe your friends, they're a little shady. See, shady, there, that's implicit bias. Maybe I am the real racist after all. But, applied to a larger population, no. Most people do not skip school. So you can't say that kind of thing. So when you're writing, you want to be aware of those moments when you are making the rest of the world sound like, look like, feel like, be like your world. Your experience is not universal to everybody else in the country or everybody else on the planet. So that is my best advice to you as a writer, thinking about your implicit biases, is to look for those places where you are attributing things that you believe and know to the entire world. All right, and that wraps up this episode on diction, where we've talked about biased diction versus neutral diction, positive, neutral, negative, all on a continuum. Just as a reminder, if you are going to write about the bias or not bias in a writer's diction, you can't just say the writer's using diction here with the word globehead. You gotta throw in that adjective, okay? The writer is using negative diction with globehead, or the writer is using some positive diction by saying his idea has a staggering simplicity. You have to be specific, because diction, of course, just literally means choice of words. Everybody uses diction anytime they say anything, anytime they write anything, anytime they text, even emojis, okay? People are using a particular kind of diction. One more in this series where we call back to the rhetorical triangle. It's going to be pretty exciting for me. Maybe not you, but I don't make these for you. I make these for me. They make me happy. Anyway, I will see you for the next one. Using the pronoun he all the time to mean everyone. My phone is ringing. I'm not going to answer it because I'm on vacation today.